Hi, in this video we are going to create and execute an Ansible playbook that will configure OSPF on an NSX distributed logical router and on the NSX Edge Services Gateway. We're also going to put a task in this playbook that will configure redistribution on the distributed logical router such that the DLR will redistribute each of its directly connected interfaces into OSPF. So let's go ahead and look at how to do this. So this playbook is actually a very straightforward playbook. There's in the previous exercises we actually created the distributed logical router and created the ESG, and we had to go gather some MOIDs, some management object IDs, tell vCenter where we wanted to place those objects. And in this case, the routers have already been created and we're simply executing configuration tasks. So we don't need to gather IDs. We can simply specify the name of the router that we want to configure. So here we've got first task, we'll configure the OSPF DLR. Second, we'll configure OSPF on the ESG. And third task, we'll configure the redistribution from directly connected into OSPF on the DLR. So let's look at the playbook. So you can see here, first task, configure OSPF on the DLR. We want the OSPF configuration that we specify here to be present. Give it the name of the router that we want it to configure. We specify a router ID, and I will actually pause and correct that because this should be a .2 value. Okay, I went ahead and corrected that little typo in the documentation here. So we can see we give it the router ID. Remember, router ID has to be a interface that's on the device. So we'll see if you look back at that DLR playbook, you'll see this is one of the interfaces, uplink interface that we created on that. And we specify a forwarding address and a protocol address because on the distributed logical router we have a separation of control and data planes. And we create the OSPF area that we'd like to use, and we also have to map the OSPF area to the interface that we want to participate in that area. Now this is important. If you're in one cloud, you need to verify that this VNIC number here is the same in your environment as it is in mine. Now I think it will likely be for most of you, but if you remember, if we scroll up here to this DLR playbook and you look at how we created these interfaces with Ansible, we never specified a VNIC number, right? We only specified the name. And when NSX Manager deploys this DLR, it will automatically assign a VNIC number to each of these interface names. So we need to make sure when we configure our OSPF under that area to interface mapping that we use the appropriate VNIC number. And there's some instructions here in the documentation on how to find that. I'll walk through that. So let's go ahead and open our vSphere web client. We're going to go to the Networking and Security tab. We're going to go to our NSX Edges. And then finally to our Ansible DLR, we'll double click. And then under Settings and under Interfaces, we see our VNICs. And I can see here that for my uplink VNIC, my VNIC number is 2. If your VNIC number is 2 also, you don't need to make any changes. However, if you have a different VNIC number associated with your uplink VNIC, before you run this play, you want to make sure that you go into here to this area map value and change the VNIC number to the correct value for your uplink VNIC. Okay, and so now, and that process is actually a lot easier for the ESG with Ansible, because if you go look at the ESG playbook and see how we specified the interfaces in the NSX Edge router, we actually specify the VNIC number and how we create the interfaces. So it's a little more straightforward to know you're using the right VNIC number when you're configuring these with Ansible with the ESG. So, okay, back to where we were. So again, configure OSPF ESG. It's the same task as configuring it on the DLR. The key difference here is the name, right? So we give it the name of the appropriate router that we want to apply this configuration to. As you can see, these are both tasks are using the same module, which the code in that module can adapt as needed both to ESG needs and DLR needs in a common module. But you use this name to keep them separate. We specify a router ID down here. But notice for the ESG, we don't need to specify a forwarder protocol address. That's only a variable that is required for DLR creation. In this case, so if you're not familiar with OSPF, OSPF has a feature called default information originate, and what that means is that the router sends out an OSPF advertisement that says that to an all zeros route, saying, I can be a default gateway for you, essentially. If you notice here, our DLR is our first hop router, right? So our virtual machines will connect directly to the DLR, and we don't need that to advertise an OSPF advertisement saying that router knows how to get everywhere. It is a stub router, and so you normally wouldn't configure default and originate on it. Now, in the case of ESG here, this is the northbound router. If there's any unknown routes from one of the virtual machines that's connected to DLR, then all that traffic is going to forward through the ESG. As in our topology, the ESG is the northbound router. So we'll have the ESG create a default route, and it'll send that via OSPF advertisements, and that's what this default originate does. We create our OSPF area, and then we map our OSPF area 0, in this case, to both of our VNets on the Edge Services Gateway. Finally, we have an additional task that will configure OSPF redistribution on the DLR. So we say our OSPF state is present. So we have enabled redistribution for OSPF. And important note here is I specify BGP state as absent. That was not defined as an optional variable when they wrote this module. So you always have to have a statement here that says BGP state. Even if you're not intending to use BGP, if you're not, then just leave it set to absent. We specify the name of the DLR, and then this rule here is what tells it to take redistribute connected. That's what this connector true here is, and the learner's OSPF, right? So that's that's not obvious syntax, and so again, you can go to this NSX redistribution module documentation, and that will explain a little bit more details about the syntax if you'd like to know. Now let's go ahead and run the playbook. So we'll go ahead and create this file here in BI. And I'm going to copy our playbook from bottom to top. I'll go into my SSH session, type the letter I for insert, right click to paste, and it looks like I get a nice clean paste, so I'll type the escape key to leave insert mode, colon, WQ to save and quit, and then we'll run our Ansible playbook. -I for inventory, hosts is the name of our inventory file, and oops, then not that, setup OSPF.yaml. Okay, and these tasks should not take too long to run since they're just configuring objects that are already running in the vCenter environment. So we saw, these tasks taking about 5 seconds to run here, and we're all done. And so we went ahead and configured OSPF on the DLR, configured OSPF on the ESG, and confirmed that the OSPF redistribution settings were correct. So if we check in our documentation here, it's actually slightly different in my run, and that could be there could be a couple reasons for that. You may see the same as I see it here. You may see it like this over here. The important thing is that there's nothing unreachable and there's nothing failed. So in this case here on the OSPF redistribution task, what Ansible is telling me is that it verified that the configuration settings I specified in the task were actually configured. And it says that it didn't have to make a change to do that, so it just reports back as okay. So we'll just go ahead and verify everything, make sure it's all working. Right. So if you look in our validate results section here in the course documentation, we'll see we're going to go in, we're going to show our OSPF neighbors and see that the ESG and DLR become neighbors. And then we're going to show the IP routing table on the ESG. And if you look at these routes here, the OSPF external type 2 routes, and see 172.16.10, 20, and 30. These are the directly connected interfaces that we created on the DLR. Remember, this is the ESG, so it has no mechanism to know about these routes unless it's learning about them. So we see it's learning about them through OSPF. And another point here, looking at this IP route also verifies that our routing redistribution is working. So if we go up and we look back at our DLR playbook, you see we created each of these interfaces, and they're all directly connected interfaces. And if we scroll back down here and look at the playbook we created to configure routing, we can see on the DLR, we only told it to put VNIC 2, our uplink interface, into OSPF. So if you're familiar with OSPF, this configuration would not normally result in this router advertising the interfaces that we didn't specify here if it weren't for our redistribution setting, right? Where we're telling it to redistribute connected into OSPF. And so if we go look at validate results, when we see these routes, this not only verifies that our OSPF is working, but it also verifies that our redistribution is working. So let's go ahead and check that out. So we're going to go ahead and open a console session into our Edge. So I'm going to go into my remote desktop, and we'll go ahead and refresh this. You can see my Edge Services Gateway now. And we'll go ahead and right click and, where was I? Open console. Sorry. And scroll down to the bottom so we can see what this is saying. Admin. And again, it's that VMware 1 exclamation, VMware 1 exclamation. And we'll do show IP OSPF neighbor. And we can see that the DLR is our neighbor. And we're in full state. And we'll go ahead and show IP OSPF routes. Sorry, show IP routes. And we can see. And so we see our OSPF external type 2 routes here showing, and these are from the DLR, and also demonstrates that the DLR is redistributing its connected interfaces. And we have our own connected interfaces, and that validates the routing configuration that we've put forth so far. Okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for joining.